Today, I am interviewing the novelist, let's just start with that, Sam Kahn. He wrote the novel Henchman, which is currently being serialized on Substack. He chose to do it that way, rather than go the route of conventional publishing. On August 8th, I reviewed the novel for the Republic of Letters on Substack. I will put a link to that below. I recommend, to get the most out of the interview, to read that review first, to see what I liked about his book and to see what my criticisms of the book, not so much the book, but how he packaged and presented it for Substack. The novel, which we're probably going to get into right away, is maybe first and foremost, it's an idea novel. His idea was to create a kind of fictional world that resembles an action movie from a Hollywood film. You know, something reminiscent of Die Hard or Indiana Jones or James Bond. And in that world, his idea is, what if one of these henchmen who are hired to protect supervillains, instead of being expendable, were actually central? And what if this central henchman, Banx Mulvaney, had a kind of existential streak, wondered if he was in the right profession? What if he were sentimental in love? What if he had aspirations to be a good baddie? Even though the novel has been serialized on Substack and has a kind of cliffhanger structure, what made me interested in the book was Banx Mulvaney, his company. We're going to talk about that. But in addition to being a novelist, Sam Kahn is the editor of the Republic of Letters, which is a literary journal on Substack, publishes everything, primarily literary criticism, but also memoir, fiction, poetry. He publishes something new every day. He also writes his own Substack. Castalia is what it's called. And he also participates in something called Inner Life. He's tremendously prolific. He claims in one of his Substack pieces that he's written 5 novels in a year. In addition to having a family and a full-time job, he lives in Central Asia, in Kyrgyzstan, in Bishkek, I think is the town or the city that he lives in. I think there's over 1 million people living there. So he has the expat's perspective on America. I don't know how long he's lived there, but we'll certainly get into that. He's a real thinker. He believes in Substack as a way to uplift the writer, to create a new publishing model that puts the sort of legacy publishing model aside and creates a kind of camaraderie between artists who publicize and praise each other, but also criticize each other in the right spirit. So I'm fascinated to talk to this guy, but I want to give a quick introduction before we get into it. So let's get into it now. John Julius Reel from Book Rants talks to Sam Kahn. A quick reminder, to support the cause, you can always like, comment, or follow, or if my passion and insights about literature make you curious about my own attempts at it, there is always My Half Orange, a story of love and language in Seville, published by Tortoise Books in 2023, about the 10 most transformative years of my life when I moved from New York City to Seville, Spain in 2005, met a local woman, and started a family with her without hardly speaking Spanish. I plan to soon upload an audio version to Substack, Rants from a Foreign Land, John Julius Reel. Follow me there to receive all my updates by email. Thanks, good people. Sam, It's a pleasure to meet you, man.
Pleasure to meet you.
You are a New Yorker, born and raised, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
But you're living in Kyrgyzstan now.
Yeah, I'm in Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan. So
Wow.
we're both expats, and I've
Yes,
been
we
here
are.
for yeah. So I've been here for a couple of years. Just how life kind of happens. I came originally for a teaching position at a university, and then met somebody. I have a family, so it seems like I'm going to be here at least for a while.
Is your wife a local?
She is, yeah. She grew up in
Wow.
Bishkek as well.
Wow. My wife is also a local. Yeah, the I was before sitting down to talk to you, I sort of binged this morning on a lot of your Substack stuff. And there was an interesting piece where you talk about America from the outside and
Yeah.
the perspective that foreigners have of the United States, which is a very, very different perspective of what Americans have about the United States when they're living there, or if it's the only place they've ever lived. Do you think that's changed in a way? Well, first of all, speak a little bit about that. And do you think that's opened up certain avenues for you as a writer? Do you think that it's changed your perspective on the creative process or on on your perspective as just someone who comments on culture?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've definitely been thinking about it. So, a few things have happened. I mean, one thing is just sort of political or as a person is just you see America in a very different way when you're abroad. And I guess the main thing is that people really think a lot about America. Like, just United States culture is foremost in, it's not foremost, but it's big in people's minds. And so kind of at the same time as I'm getting broader perspectives, I'm not seeing everything from this vantage point of kind of American essentialism. I also find myself thinking about America's responsibilities in the world a lot. And as a writer, yeah, I mean, some interesting stuff has happened since I've been here. Uh, I went through a phase of a lot of kind of what was just coming out was a lot of nostalgia, basically, for the beginning. I was writing a lot of things that were kind of nostalgic for New York, and I think in a lot of ways what I wish New York what New York was or is.
When
And
did you
then
leave?
late 2023.
Okay.
And and then recently, I've been writing stuff that seems to be kind of living in like a pop culture world. So what it feels
Henchman.
like,
Henchman, which
yeah,
was what we're going to
Henchman,
talk. Yeah, for
Henchman
sure.
started that, and then the novel I'm working on now is that as well, and it's basically seeing stuff on television that feels very familiar to me. That's all these kind of movies and all these settings that are like close that are all these American themes, but is also happening in this kind of fantasia space. And so that's kind of where my head
Yeah. I
is
wondered
sort
when
of,
I read Henchman, I called it, I think in my review, a very American novel.
yeah,
But it's not American in any conventional sense, but the kind of mythos of the book. You very often get a sense of, I mean, I've lived in Spain for 19 years now, and nobody does popular entertainment culture like Americans. We do that so well. Like if you have a program, well, action films, which is basically the background of Henchman, but I've often thought like a show like Friends, which, it's so well written, it's so well acted, it's so well produced, but it's really superficiality.
yeah,
There's nothing really profound in it, but it's so well packaged and done. And I feel like that's something that Spain, at least, the people in Spain admire about America. Like how well we kind of, I don't know if how well Hollywood, how well Netflix, I guess, can be put in that same rubric, but how well they entertain us.
yeah. Yeah, I think something, it's funny. I can remember the exact moment when it kind of happened for me, but something sort of opened up for me here, which is about this, is about American pop culture. And it's, I think the realization basically is it's like, what is the collective subconscious? And if you're in different eras, if you're in Florence or something, it would all be medieval Florence, it would all have to do with the life of Christ. If you're in ancient Greece, it would have to do with these Trojan War heroes. And for us, it's really like the movies. And
Yes.
and but there was kind of a certain like barrier to get over, which had to do with kind of intellectual property with some different things that there's a big difference between writing a scene where you say, you know, Brian Howell walks into a room, and then you have to spend the next paragraph or the next few pages describing who that person is. And who are they? And the audience doesn't, in some deep way, they don't really care. It's
Mm.
just this kind of figment that refers back to kind of like an ordinary person. But if you say James Bond walks into a room, it's an amazing shortcut. Um, all of a sudden, you have this whole, you don't need to describe who James Bond is. You don't need to give the psychology of it. And you also have this whole structure built around it. There are reasons to kind of not do that. You get kind of locked into that structure, and there's sort of this intellectual property question. Are you now in the James Bond verse? But what I felt was opening up was this possibility of kind of changing the point of orientation so that it's not that you're inhabiting an Albert Broccoli film or whatever. It's that you're taking James Bond as kind of a fictional character and then moving that into your own world and what you want to say. So for me, that just felt like a very exciting artistic direction. And it's sort of not something that would have occurred to me until a couple of years ago.
Well, yeah, I mean, let's get right into Henchman because that's what we're talking about. What I found original about the book, well, first of all, I consider you kind of like an idea man, an idea guy. Now, I know you kind of, in one of your essays, you went for a period of years without having ideas. But I think you said 13 years or something where you went and then suddenly you kind of train the mind or the imagination to produce these ideas. You kind of relaxed into it, is the way you kind of described it in the piece. But I feel like this is a great idea for a novel. When I was writing the review of your piece, I ultimately cut the first three paragraphs because they were about that. Like, how many great ideas for novels end up ever getting done, right? I mean, it's a great idea for a novel, but also like once you got it on the page, for the listeners or viewers, let's talk about it. The idea, in my view, is a kind of this world where this henchman, who is this expendable protector of supervillains, becomes central. And he becomes the character we care about. And all of the other characters, the James Bonds, who makes an appearance, John Wick makes an appearance, Indiana Jones makes an appearance, Flash Gordon makes an appearance. These are kind of the expendable characters in this universe. And we're focusing on this guy who doesn't really measure up in this world of supervillainy. And this world where people are dying almost ridiculously, and this action, it goes from one scene to another of action. It's a kind of Maconda, for you. It's a world where I don't know how to pronounce it, but the county where Faulkner produced all his novels. This is the world that you're creating. You're creating this world, and this is what's so, I think, original about it. It's just this thing that you're having fun with that creates a world, and then there's Banx Mulvaney, who is this character who we end up caring so much about. Okay, or I ended up caring so much about, especially in chapter 5, because that's where he opens up in the book, I think. Now, there's a line that I quoted when I was reading this morning. What was it that you said about the book? This is what you said. You said, it's about interiority in a way that nothing in the action genre ever is. I think that's really what Henchman is about. It's like the action world that we do so well in America becomes secondary to you as the writer, and you give us Banx, who is this kind of simp, but he's fascinating. He thinks about his career. He thinks about what's his place in this world. You mentioned someplace it's kind of a workplace comedy. I think that's true. I disagree with people who say that this is a parody of that type of film. I don't think it's a parody. I think you're using it differently than as a parody. Comment on that. What do you think?
Yeah, I hope it's not a parody. That was kind of the fear, especially as I was working on it and then reading it over, was it's kind of like, oh, like how far am I wandering into Austin Powers and everybody when they're adolescent? I remember kids in school writing these kind of Bond parodies. Yeah, I mean, I definitely wanted to do something exactly along with the lines of what you're describing. And by the way, thank you for the review. I felt like you really got it very well, what it's trying to do. And yeah, I mean, it's trying to create a whole world. And for me, I mean, I think this is the most fun I've had in writing. And something seemed to switch over internally for me, which is the metaphor that I use a lot about writing is that it's kind of like you're off on a ocean voyage. And for a long time, as you're developing as a writer, sometimes maybe always, you're within sight of land. You kind of know what your identity is. You're kind of checking in with land, and then there's sort of a moment when you're like, okay, I'm forgetting about myself and everything I know, and I'm going off on this kind of ocean voyage, and I don't know where I'm going to end up. And I'm always sort of trying to do that, and it's very scary when that happens because usually you get into like the book I'm working on now. I don't know if it's going to make the other side. Like that's always sort of the
Mm.
feeling. And so for this, there was just something very fun about it that
Do you
the
remember
character.
having that feeling when you were writing this one? Did you remember having the feeling when you were writing Henchman that you might not get to the end?
There's always that feeling of you might not get to the end. Like there's always this. I think that's for me. That's kind of the central thing about writing or writing long form stuff is that you may always just sink at sea,
Sure.
and so there's always that. But yeah, with this there's actually a very clear moment where uh, I'm kind of follow it. There's a structure to a Bond novel, and the base blows up, and then off he goes, and I didn't really know where he was going to go from there,
Mm.
and so he's literally kind of swimming in the water, and something about that really relaxed me and made me just sort of trust in the process. So sort of as I was writing that moment without knowing where he's going, I kind of found part two of it developing. So it felt very improvisational in that way. And
That's the
to me,
excitement of it. That's the
yeah,
excitement of it. Yeah.
yeah, to me that was really special. Was this feeling of just being in a place of pure fantasy. And most of the fiction I've written before has tended to be more anchored in reality. I mean, this is giving me like a few because it's sort of in genre. There are a few uh, orientation points that I found myself kind of adhering to. And in a way, it was very easy to write because you know what the some of the plot points that you have to hit because of what the genre is. But just that feeling of this very kind of vertiginous feeling of this isn't me, this guy has aspects of me, but I'm not that close to my life. This is just kind of pure play. That was very fun to do.
Yeah, I never got the sense like, is this Sam? I mean, I would, this is never, I would never ask you, like, is this partially autobiographical? Of course, every novel is autobiographical.
Yeah.
I mean, when you were, there's a couple of things I want to talk about. Number one is in your essay on your writing discipline, you talked about, I'm paraphrasing you, but getting into a zone and just seeing where it took you.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a little bit, or you refer to that, I guess, glancingly when you talk about it being extemporaneous or off the cuff. That I imagine being a lot of fun, but also vertiginous, as you said, and slightly scary. And that you don't think when you write, which I think is great advice. I think that, I guess this is my question to you. You had to kind of balance the sort of extemporaneous sense of where am I going to go? He's in the water. You know, what world is he going to enter? By the way, I should just say this while it occurs to me. I think my favorite character other than Banx is Milagros. Because Milagros is this character where it works for you so well because, just so that listeners know, he's this character who kind of, when they're going about causing mayhem and robbing banks or financial institutions, and they accidentally have to kill someone or hurt someone badly, Milagros is always the person to comfort the person as they die. And Banx has this obsession with wanting to know what people's final thoughts are. That's sort of part of his existential streak. And it really allows, Milagros really allows the reader to get to know Banx better. Okay? So, this is my question, is on the one hand, you're riffing. You're going from one world to another. That was my favorite other world. Also the two Jacobi brothers, Julie and Eric, and how their rivalry. And it's you're having fun. It's obvious that you, as the writer, are having fun, which is something that the reader absolutely appreciates. And I think that a lot of writers should realize that more. I think there's kind of dour fiction. I think it's just, you read it and you maybe recognize the art of it, but you don't get the sense that the writer's having any fun. But at the same time, Banx becomes this character that continues to have ideas. Like there's a moment in the book where I think you're going to kill him off. I don't know if I'm spoiling it for people, but anyway,
No.
It doesn't matter so much. It's other things. But there's a moment where his friends come for him, his other henchmen. And he is, and I'm like, wow, I'm choking up when you write about how, I really choked up in that moment. That's the moment when I most choked up. I thought, you're going to kill him off there. And I thought that he would never get what he wanted. But in a way he was, because he was his camaraderie he was having with his friends. He ends up sort of ducking that. But even afterwards, I was like, maybe he missed. He should have ended it there. But then you keep giving us ideas. Like Banx is having ideas. Like in the speech, which is something I want to talk to you about, because I never really got that. But I think I got it. I think it's sort of like this moment where each character has this moment to sort of explain him herself. And it's this kind of moment in a film where, the sort of light bulb moment for the kind of casual viewer. But you play with that. But there's a moment where he thinks like, am I one of the good guys because I've survived? Right? It becomes this is where you never stop making me think. I mean, that's a thought that I've had in life. Like, have I survived? I mean, it's a superficial thought. It's a thought that I have like when I'm being totally self-absorbed. Like, am I important because I'm still alive?
Yeah.
In other words, does my writing matter because I've created a world where I can still write? I mean, like, this is just so self-absorbed, but I could relate to him when he said that. Like, his superficiality and his self-absorption, I mean, like, yeah, I felt implicated. So the thing is, you're doing this thing. Did you have an idea that you were going to have these ideas? Or did you just say, well, is Banx existentialism kind of amplifying and deepening and growing as his adventure goes? And I don't know if we want to get to the end, but I'm fascinated by like what his mindset is in the end. He kind of closes, to not ruin it for people, he kind of closes off in the end. I feel like he kind of says, you know what? I want to live my dream. And I have to kill off this part of myself, the part of myself that's most tender and the reader's going to love. You kind of kill it off, I think, or I wonder. about that.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot there.
Yes.
So let me start with the thing about discipline. So yeah, so there's something that I've been kind of saying about craft, or that I've really come to believe in my life, which I think runs counter to a lot of what the received wisdom of craft was when I was coming out of school or whatever, how most writers kind of talk about it. And part of it is just personality. I'm a Sagittarius. I like to kind of wander. I like to explore. I just can't edit for the life. If I look at something that's written, I can't edit it. So I sort of only get one shot at a manuscript. And for me, that just feels right. That actually, I believe that that's kind of the better way to do it. So a lot of how I've been writing is trying to write in the way that a reader would read, which is, I want to know what happens next. I don't really know. Like usually I get
Mm.
these, usually if an idea for something comes to me, I get a very brief download and I usually kind of know how it's going to end and I know a few things along the way, but I really am following it. And so this idea came somehow, and so I'm in this world of Henchman, and then it's pretty interesting as I'm working through this of kind of following Banks's journey to supervillainy, of noticing what's the stuff that's Sam, like what am I getting at within myself, and there are a few things that came up, some of them you've touched on. Um, I mean, I think there's just this thing that I've kind of struggled with all my life, which is this feeling of being very interested in kind of inner worlds and other people's inner worlds, feeling like everybody's got this kind of complicated stuff inside them. And then social interaction is just so not that. You're so inhabiting your roles. And it's kind of like, what happened? Like, what do you do with all of this inner stuff? And so somehow an action movie seemed like a very fun way to explore that because anytime people watch an action movie, if you're watching it, you're kind of shouting at the screen like, hey, why aren't you guys thinking of this?
Mm.
Just look behind you, like he's going to come through the air vents, obviously, this kind of stuff. But the characters aren't allowed to think that way. They have to occupy that role. So it's kind of like, so that just felt like what I discovered as I was working within the structure of this is that I was trying to deal with that mismatch that I've always had between trying to comprehend like a rich inner life with how social interaction works. And then there are a few other things that came up as I was working on this. I've been working in film for a while, in documentary film, and you have all these close relation. You spend a lot of time like sitting in cars with other guys in the crew, and it's in this very hierarchical system. But depending on who you talk to, people are people are just willing to be much more open, and then suddenly their personalities change in a different thing. And then I've been working on a film about veterans, and the veterans I found to be really interesting people because they're sort of supposed to be soldiers and they're supposed to occupy this role as soldiers, but they tend to be pretty weird, interesting people, and so they have a way of kind of commenting on what they're doing, and so I think a lot of that was coming out in the manuscript. But what was pretty interesting was that as I was working on this, it was actually a very difficult time in my life. There was a bunch of stuff going on, and just kind of seeing that then get reflected in the novel was a very sort of interesting thing. It's exactly what you were saying. It was exactly about that he's kind of closing off. I felt like I was going through a moment of saying goodbye to a certain more naive, more kind of childlike view of the world, putting on more of like a shell. And there's a moment when, at the end of the book, where Banks really does that. There's actually a very emotional moment for me where I'll describe. It's at the end of the second part, um, and Banks is he's about to go through a fight, and his kind of girlfriend is betraying him, and there was a moment there where I was waiting for a phone call that I knew was going to be a very sort of difficult phone call. It was scheduled in a couple of days, and the moment when I was writing, but I didn't know how it was going to go. And the day I was writing it, I realized what kind of has to happen with Banks in that moment is that he's ends up really being betrayed by his friends, by his girlfriend, that he's like, totally alone at this moment. And I kind of realized that was sort of what was going to happen to me based on what was going on with the phone call. And it was a very strange, powerful feeling of sort of like something you're working on kind of mirroring your personal life in this unexpected way. Uh, so that's where I'm really getting to in terms of creativity, is this feeling of like really trying to let go, really trying to just sort of like let the subconscious do the work as much as possible, and then see how that mirrors and parallels your own conscious life. And it tends to be pretty interesting how that works out.
Well, it's fascinating. I've never actually thought of a novel being autobiographical in that way. How absolutely I can see that now. If you're immersed in something and you're letting your subconscious just flow and you're just letting the book come out, well, then you obviously have to be open to your daily life affecting the composition. It's obviously going to affect the composition. You can't really close. Well, here's my question. Should you or shouldn't you close yourself off to sort of like the distractions of everyday life when you sit down to write? Or do you do it partially? Or do you do it to your advantage? What do you think?
Yeah. This is the hardest part of the whole thing. Like more and more when I'm thinking about craft, I'm thinking much less about, oh, character, plot, development, this kind of stuff. And I'm thinking much more about this kind of psychological realm. So, right, on the one hand, if you're writing, you have to kind of shut yourself off in this big way. You have to take this chunk of time where you say, basically, I'm not part of the world. I'm not part of any other responsibility. And you're just kind of serving whatever this idea is, whatever the melody of your composition is. And usually you have to make different kinds of sacrifices. You have to be, pretty ruthless about your time in order to get that. But then but of course you're still you, and so all these different energies from your daily life are showing up. And right now I'm getting into this kind of mystical place of feeling like the stuff that's going on off stage is actually still part of the novel in a weird kind of way.
Well, that's what you're
And
saying, which is interesting.
yeah,
You know?
yeah. And so it's kind of fun for me to be thinking that way. But it also, but more and more I'm thinking about writing as almost like an athletic kind of activity where your main responsibility is about, kind of your diet, being in like the right frame of mind, your energy, the kind of
Sure.
energy that you have
Mm.
is basically what will come out of it. Yeah, so
I
that's kind of where.
I agree. I mean, you mentioned in one of your pieces that I read this morning how quitting drinking helped your writing, or it was key, because you have to kind of always be informed. I think I'm probably about 20 years older than you. I'm 57. And I've noticed that I have got to get sleep. I have got to exercise. I have got to take my vitamins. I cannot eat carbohydrates at a certain hour of the day, or my mind is duller. I have to take naps. I really have to take care of myself as a kind of mental athlete if I plan to continue writing well. Another thing I want to ask before I forget is, like, you mentioned how you're not someone who feels comfortable editing your own work, right? I mean, I love to edit as a writer. I love to choose which sentences make it and which sentences don't. I love to choose which sections make it, which sections don't. I'm wondering, because you mentioned, and I mentioned this in the piece or in my review on Henchman, when you mentioned writing 5 full novels in a year, and I kind of jokingly referred to 5 good novels, and you jokingly responded in the end, yeah, they're all good. I think, but do you think that the editing in your case might come in the sense of, well, of these 5 novels, only 2.5, only 2 might work? In other words, are you just editing on a different level? You mentioned also in one of your piece how editing is kind of a power move. But I mean, you have to kind of do the power move on yourself sometimes. Like you have to say, all right, you know what? I just spent 6 months or 3 months immersed in this novel that doesn't really measure up to maybe this other one. Are you just editing on a different level, on a kind of macro level, where maybe I'm editing on a micro level?
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, there are these conscious decisions that, I mean, I do that we do all the time. A big one is just like which story do you want to commit to? I mean, every time you do that, it's kind of like, okay, the next, X many months or however long it's going to be is going to be in this space, and that's usually a fairly agonized and fairly conscious decision. Right. I mean, there's definitely stuff at the end about what do which one are you trying to kind of promote? In terms of editing, I mean, my job, like my income is basically as an editor. So I
A
respect
video editor?
for Persuasion for it's a kind of magazine newspaper editing. So
Okay.
I definitely respect it. I mean, I think editing can make pieces better, but it's not that I don't like to edit my own stuff. I literally can't do it.
Yeah,
Like
no.
it's
Right.
there it's there and the manuscript is done and just this idea of like, okay, I'm going to take out this piece and move this around. There's something about my brain that just doesn't compute. And I know that for other people and for people who I regard as, much better writers, a lot of them seem to be able to do it really well and seem to get to a deeper level. But for me, what I've kind of got into is this. There's kind of a fun game in the process where I know that I only get one shot at it, so it's a little bit improv. And if a detail shows up early on, and I don't know why the detail is there, I'm kind of like, okay, I guess this
Yeah,
has to be important later on.
sure.
So
The
so
trusting,
the
yeah, the
yeah.
trusting of your subconscious. You seem to do that very, very well. I'm not, by the way, at all disparaging your way of working. I think it's a fascinating way to work. It's just not a way of work that I maybe, look, maybe I can't do it, or maybe I don't have the balls to do it. I think it's a very gutsy way to write because you can't really backpedal, right? Sometimes I would look at the paragraphs in Henchman, and it's very a generous type of writing. It almost reads spoken, right? And you kind of can imagine, um, who wrote The Red and the Black?
Stendhal.
Stendhal,
Yeah.
dictating his novels. Yeah, I could see it. You could see
Yeah.
these people if they have a certain. I'm sure that Dickens also. These were writers who just, or Trollope. These were writers who just produced at such a level, or even Henry James at the end of his life when he was dictating his novels to people. I do feel as though editing is something that can absolutely kill an artistic vision. It can dull it.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, it can read overproduced.
Yeah.
I think I've fallen into that many, many times as a writer. I've fallen into that many, many times. But yeah, I mean, when you talk about, for example, I've never in my life had an idea for a novel or a story. I might have something like two men, or love triangle, and see where that goes, right? But I'm not. It's not an idea like Henchman is an idea. Like see what happens if you have this sort of action world as a background, and you have this character that's normally expendable central, and let's see what happens there. Like that, I've never had an idea like that in my life. But you said in one of your pieces that you think it's something you can train the imagination to do. Now, is that part of what you talk about when you like? You also have this other sort of Substack thing, Inner Life, where you kind of also you mentioned also in our talk so far. You talked about just how you train the mind to do that. I think people might be interested to know how
Yeah.
you did that.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a pretty interesting thing that happened in my life. Like I don't think of myself as being a very creative person. Like if I look back at what was going on in my head as a kid, my inner life was all like baseball statistics. I mean, it's just like lists of shit. I mean, that's basically what my inner life kind of looks like. But I knew pretty early on that I wanted to be a writer, and I felt like I was given a few gifts. Like I was given a gift for uh, just kind of like putting words together, which is important in this, like knowing what kind of the next word should be, like a pretty decent ear, an ability to concentrate for a long time. But I felt like I really wasn't given the gift of imagination. And so the 13 years I'm talking about without an idea was from age like 13 to 26. And just my life would have been it was very like analytic. And then I remember
Just
trying
to
to,
point out, I think that those years are normally our most creative years.
yeah. So I was kind of like, and I was around all these creative people, and I was kind of like, oh wow, how are these things kind of popping into their heads? And I feel
Yeah.
so stodgy. Um, and and then I was trying to write out of college, and it was hard. I mean, I was really stuck for stuff. And I remember the moment where it sort of happened. Um, I was for some reason I was sleeping in the back of a car. I was working on something, and I just started hearing voices. I just started hearing people talking to each other, and and it was like, oh, like who are these people? What are they talking about? And and there was something about that kind of receptivity that I felt like, okay, like I guess it's a play. And then I started writing plays for a while. And for a long time, it was like I get like a few snatches of dialogue, and then there would be kind of be a gap, and I wouldn't know how to fill in the gap. And that's how it was for a while. And then I think just as time went by, it's a little bit, like what the spiritual people would say is like you put a you put in an intention and then you kind of forget about it, and then that sort of shows up. And I think that's what I've been trying to do is to say like, my intention is I want to I want to write novels. I want to be good at novels. A few years ago it was like short stories. And then usually you kind of put that intention out, and then something opens up, and you can kind of get it back. Like the story kind of fills itself in for you. But it's a very weird, delicate process. So anyway, a lot of what I feel like I've been talking about more in kind of analytical writing is trying to like encourage people to be a little bit more in that direction, to kind of like open yourself up a little bit more, because it's been fun how it's happened in my life, and it wasn't necessarily what I thought fiction was or what I thought imagination was when I was a kid.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing. As the years passed, I think I suffer from wanting to control everything too much. The people around me, all my projects, my family, my kids. It's something I fall into, which is ultimately detrimental to everyone. And I've often, with time, I've come to see writing as almost like you're tuned into a radio signal and you're hearing voices. But at first, it's very staticky. So you're getting kind of tiny snatches of dialogue with gaps. And as you go through it in different drafts, the static begins to fill in with voices. If you're open to the subconscious speaking to you. So
Yeah.
in the drafts, it's like that broadcast that's coming from your subconscious. You're easing into it, and it's beginning to fill the gaps. So if there is a sort of later phase to my writing, it's that. It's like tuning in. Little by little through drafts, I begin to get who these characters are and what they're saying to each other. And very often that'll happen, for example, if I get up. Seriously, if I get up to get a drink of water. If I go take a shit. I mean, like these, suddenly your mind is like, oh, so that's what he says.
Yeah.
Oh, so that's what happens. You
Yeah.
know? And I think perhaps certain people are more gifted at tuning into that broadcast in the first, when you first kind of affix the antenna or something, and it starts to coming into you more clear. And maybe the next time you do it, maybe one of the reasons why, I'm thinking off the cuff here, but maybe other voices come in and drown out those original voices, and it's hard for you to sort of like distinguish, and probably you shouldn't. You should just go with the first draft. An athlete, it's great. Like, you can't really performance art, right? Like, you can't. Let's talk about a basketball game or a baseball game or a football game. Like, those performances are purely subconscious, unconscious. They're not thought. You don't think what you're going to do with a basketball. You see it happen before you make the pass, and suddenly it's in the guy's hands before anyone else sees it. But for example, I don't know, I just feel as though your work in many ways, and this is something that's very evident when you're reading Henchman, it almost reads in some places like performance art. It has that excitement. It has that excitement. It's one of the, I would say it's one of the strengths of your work.
Thank you.
Right. I think a lot of people could do that badly, by the way, but you don't.
Yeah. By the way, I love the image of the radio signal. That's very cool. It's a very nice way to think about it. Um, yeah, I mean, right. I definitely am trying to go into a place that's more about kind of performance and subconscious and these kinds of things. I guess one of the ways I've been framing this to myself is just kind of thinking about where our choices come in, uh, our free will, our choices, because it's like for the most part, we just are who we are. Like what skills we have are basically kind of the skills that are given to us. And so when we talk about whether somebody's talented or not talented, usually that's kind of the thing we're talking about. And to me, that's become sort of uninteresting. Like some people are a little bit more mellifluous in their prose or whatever. Uh, but for me, what's interesting in thinking about talent and this stuff are the few choices that we have. I think there's this phrase, I thought it was Uta Hagen, but I haven't been able to figure out who said it, that like an actor's talent is their choices. And I think that's really true. Like you get like over the course of your life, you get a few choices, and those are the ones that really are who you are as a writer. And for me as a reader, that's usually kind of what I'm looking for. I'm looking for like whether the writer made some kind of a brave decision in their book or not. I mean, the big
Interesting.
one, and some of these choices are a little bit more macro than others. I mean, I think the big one is whether you're bold enough to actually try to write, which is a hard thing to do. Whether put your money where your mouth is and you sit down every day or however often you're able to do it, as opposed to just talking about it. And then there are these ones where it's like in each manuscript, you I feel like you sort of get a decision at one point or another. And I kind of really believe this. It's almost like I've seen mountain climbers talk about something where like every mountain has a crux to it. And you
Mm-hmm.
can, and it's like something about the way a face develops. There's like a hard piece of the puzzle. And if you can just kind of go through that, then the mountain sort of opens up for you.
Mm.
If you go around it, it's usually the wrong thing to do. And so for me, what I'm very often looking to do is to say like, okay, like where is the brave decision going to be within a given work, and to try to follow whatever that is. And sometimes the brave decision is like, oh no, it wants to like have a whole new subplot and it's going to be 600 pages and I'm going to destroy my life with this. But that you're really trying to listen to yourself honestly, and it's like, okay, what's been brave, what's been cowardly, and to try to follow that. So that's a lot of how I'm trying to think about this stuff.
When you mention sort of the discussion on talent, writers' talent, are you touching on that when you said in one of your pieces how you're more about writing than you are about literature? And I wonder if this sort of to dovetail or to shift into sort of the Republic of Letters, like you seem to be championing writing that is not maybe per se literature, but is, again, I'm using the word with inverted quotation marks because I don't really know what that is either. Like if I read from beginning to end, well then what else can you ask for as a writer? But when you are choosing pieces for the Republic of Letters, are you looking for writing? What do you mean by writing in literature? You speak about that, but it
Yeah, yeah.
struck me as interesting.
Yeah, feel that there are kind of two sects, two sort of churches within the world of letters. There's kind of the church of basically God's gifts, and then there's kind of the church of the big tent. And the church of God's gifts, I would think of as somebody like Harold Bloom, where if you read Harold Bloom stuff, it feels like there are only about 20 writers ever, and they're part of this kind of
Sure.
genealogy, and they're just kind of working off of each other. And it's kind of like a few people have been given this gift, and they're the only ones who matter, and everybody else should just go and get their
Drive an
CPA and
ice
do
cream
something
truck.
else
Yeah.
with their life. Yeah. And I felt like that was how literature was presented to me growing up. And there's a part of me that's certainly very sympathetic to that way of thinking. And then it felt like a big part of becoming a more mature person, of growing up, was to sort of reject that and to say, like, wait a minute, this is not a democratic way of thinking, and it's not a truthful way of thinking. Like, it's a big world out there. Everybody has something to say. The job of a writer is to both to tune into yourself and then to have a great deal of empathy, to have a great deal of interest in everybody. And so I think in one essay I talked about it from the like that movie Ratatouille. It's kind of like anybody can cook. Like that's kind of the mindset
Mm.
that I want to be in. Big tent. And so Substack is totally that. It's just, whoosh, like all of these people coming and writing stuff. Not all of it is amazing. Not all of it is like, the best thing ever, but a lot of it is really good and a lot of it is really interesting. So kind of like ideologically, almost religiously, I've kind of placed myself on the side of that as opposed to this other way of thinking, which is kind of what the establishment tends to do. And it tends to be like, okay, we have this many prizes in a year and everybody's competing for this one little thing. And I'm like, man, that is really, there's something about that is so juvenile and so small. And what you want to be is you want to be part of the big tent and the big church. So that's a lot of what I'm like looking to do and looking to kind of be more mature within myself and thinking that way. But that also means that you're trying to be as excellent as possible in yourself, and you're trying to look for excellence in other people and kind of reward merit wherever you see it. So the Republic of Letters is, for me, is just this super fun project, this gift to be able to work on it. And yeah, it's kind of rooted in the ethos of the big tent. I mean, obviously, I want pieces to be good, but I tend to be very open to taking in whatever and just taking in stuff from a lot of different people. And it's been very rewarding so far. I mean, a lot of the pieces that have been the best pieces I have, they're from people who have like 5 followers on Substack.
Yeah.
They don't have kind of names attached to them. A lot of them are just writing stuff. Sometimes it's from their personal life. Somebody writes a piece about being a butcher or this job they
Yeah.
did working on a medieval grave site. And it's fascinating. And it's
Yeah.
like, and you just multiply that by the number of people who have interesting lives or stories, which is everybody. And then you
Yes.
multiply that by the number of people, by the number of interesting incidents that happen to us. And it's like the amount of interesting writing out there is just potentially infinite. Like all you have to do is write honestly, and it has to be interesting. Like I mean, your piece I loved, which was just about kind of like outsiders and just I forget the name of the guy, but who had this fascinating life.
Yeah. Charles
And
Farrell. Yeah. Yeah.
Charles Farrow is like oh my
Guy's
God, like
unbelievable.
he has this he's done all these different jobs.
Yeah.
He's doesn't seem like a writer, but but I can tell from the way you wrote about it that his stuff is fascinating. So I feel like kind of my favorite word these days is aperture. That we can just like we can be in this mindset of kind of opening the aperture much wider, take both with ourselves, like letting ourselves kind of pour into our work, and then being a lot more generous about who we think is good, who we think has
Yeah.
something that's worth saying. Um, But yeah, I mean, if you think that way, then eventually you run into some problems of like supply and demand in the marketplace. But that's kind of another issue.
Well, you mentioned there's a great line in one of your pieces about what we need is an artistic middle class. I don't. I'm not. What was the line? Do you remember?
Yeah, I'm sure I said that. It's not my line. It comes from it's either like Jaron Lanier or Kevin Kelly, one of these kind of like internet forward thinking people. Um,
But not
I think
high
yeah,
art. You want Lord like a kind of art. There's a kind of. It falls into this idea of a kind of democratic.
yeah,
I remember reading once like Wallace Shawn was like reading Shakespeare when he was 12. Now, if
yeah,
only people who are reading Shakespeare when they're 12, only them, only they can write. Well, you're missing out, the reader's missing out on a lot of experiences. You know what I mean? Like you need to have a kind of, you don't need to be that intelligent to write. You just need to be honest and to feel deeply.
right,
You know?
exactly.
And that is something that I think a lot of people overlook when they're judging the quality of literature. I've sometimes like some of the most memorable writing I have ever read is as a teacher of composition to college students. Now, I say to them, I give them one assignment, I said, 500 words at least, don't bore me. That's it. Nothing else. Don't bore me. Now, they end up writing some of the most amazing pieces that I will never forget. Just like I won't forget, for example, the final chapter of Ulysses. But they're on the same level in my mind. They're just as I will go to the tomb with both. You know,
Yeah,
and these kids are never going to write again. You know what I mean? They did it because they wanted to sort of stand out. They wanted to express themselves, but that's not what they're going to dedicate their lives to. But nonetheless, these things could be compiled, and I swear to you, people would be moved. I
yeah,
know they would be moved. You
yeah,
know?
yeah. I've had similar experiences. So yeah, I mean, I'm kind of going through this process where I'm really trying to just feel out what it is, but it's built around that idea that it's and the feeling I have is what was presented to me as literature is kind of like being in, I don't know, some kind of like oil rich society where there are like a handful of people at the top and then everybody else is kind of at the bottom. And that's just the way it's always talked about.
Yeah,
You know,
you talk
oh,
about here. It's like
yeah,
you say it's more. You were looking for something more Quakerist than high
yeah,
church. Perhaps that's what you mean by like the tent, like the big
yeah,
tent.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and just kind of the way people use these things like genius, all this stuff,
Mm.
there's something very, very enclosed and very aristocratic about it. And I really just don't want to be part of that. I don't want that to be what literature is and what writing is. So I feel like I've been trying to conscientiously move in this different direction. And and yeah, and then it's like, okay, what do you once you believe that, it's like, what do you do with it? If you know, if you've got a whole bunch of students in your composition class who are writing great stuff, the stuff is not going to get published in the New York Times. It's not going to get published in the literary journals that we have, but it's still a value. How do we make this kind of work? And so what it feels to me is that the technology has opened up in this really rich way with Substack
Yeah.
and just kind of the technological base of Substack to be like, okay, like why not have your students put their compositional work online or for you to do it for them or for
Yeah.
kind of a whole network of people to be doing that. And then we have this very rich kind of gift economy of people supporting each other. And how the money works for that, God knows. But what I've also kind of come to is this feeling that uh, we're just so much in this place of consumerist dependency. We're kind of given stuff that we're just supposed to take in, and we're
Mm.
just kind of like, oh yeah, this I like this show, I don't like this show, and that's like our engagement with art. And it's like, fuck that, that
Yeah.
sucks. What's much better is to be just a person who's producing all the time, and then also has some kind of reciprocity with other people who are doing the same thing. And that's like the world I want to live in.
Yeah.
And it feels like that's kind of coming into reach in a very beautiful way right now with this platform, and Republic of Letters is meant to be part of that.
Yeah, I mean, I want to get into, well, I'll save that question for later, since you sort of, the transition is easy. Um, the major criticism I had about Henchman is that I felt that it's not really packaged right for Substack. I felt as though it's not a book that should, I think it, I don't think it's most comfortably read installments. I think it's something that should be read until you want to stop reading. And
Yeah.
I just felt as though you didn't read. Maybe this is arrogant for me to say, Sam. Forgive me for saying it, but I feel as though you didn't know what your book was about. You didn't know. You didn't really understand, at least in your description of it on the first post. You didn't describe it how it really is. It's not really this. I think it's got a soul that you seem to not want to mention. Or I mean, is that because it's modesty? I mean, is it because you uh, didn't want to give it? I mean, this is all leading to the idea of, like, I feel as though Substack has to do more than just produce good writing. You're sort of doing it on the you are doing it on the Republic of Letters. But you're doing it with short pieces. Like, and you're doing it with pieces that are mostly nonfiction. It seems to me it's harder for me, for example, I don't think I'm alone in this, to sort of, and if you look at your site, it's very much the same. If someone's reading something, if you'll get 110 likes on a piece about, well, about what it's like to, maybe it doesn't have 110 likes, but these pieces about literary criticism, but then you're getting, 2 likes when you publish Henchman, the full manuscript.
Yeah.
Why is it that and it's true with me too, like, I am more reluctant to dive into a piece of fiction than I
Yeah.
am to dive into a piece of nonfiction, partially because I know fiction requires a bigger commitment. I can skim on a free conscience a piece of nonfiction. I can't skim on a free conscience a piece of fiction, because I feel like I'm going to miss something. Like those moments you talk about, like this odd detail, you kind of want to, but if you do start giving that kind of attention to, I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, do you agree with me that the reason why fiction doesn't seem to triumph on Substack like nonfiction is because it requires a greater commitment, that people put
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
aside to read later?
For absolutely, for sure. You mentioned a bunch of things, so let me take them in pieces. So first of all, I completely agree with you about the packaging. Like serialization is not quite the right form. I just don't have. I'm just not set up to publish in kind of a normal way,
It's hard,
and
yeah.
yeah, I don't have an agent. I don't have a publisher who's interested in it for a few reasons. I think this is probably like this manuscript wouldn't exactly be a fit for what they want to do. And just the way I'm thinking right now is I really love Substack. I really love kind of that direction. I just wanted to kind of roll the ball that way and see sort of what it leads to. I agree with you completely. Like I'm the same way. If I see fiction on Substack, something in me will kind of block off from it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting what's going on. So probably a solution may be, and this is only something that I'm really thinking about because I'm going through that experience, and then I read your critique of it, which I agree with. And it's kind of like, yeah, maybe what somebody's going to do is develop, a Substack that's more for kind of long form stuff. That's Ex Libris was kind of trying to do this, but a place that's like a publishing company that's more internet based. There may be something that happens because people don't really want to read fiction because they're coming into Substack planning to read something kind of short and morsel like. And if you see something that's slower in fiction, you don't want to do this thing where you have to slow your brain down. You just put it aside. And we're all that way. So if there's a medium that's a little bit more conducive to fiction, that might change it. But there is something much deeper going on, which is that our culture is just not a stories culture. Like we're not, um, we don't kind of grow up really with fiction and stories. We grow up with kind of analysis, and we grow up with articles, and that's basically kind of the structure of our brains. And not all, a lot of other cultures are just different. I mean, I think the way people deal with kind of the gap, the divide between truth and fiction is just very different from reality and fiction is very different from what we do. So to me, a whole kind of phase that I'm going through right now is trying to think about how to deal with that problem, basically, how to try to kind of smuggle fiction in to stuff that feels more kind of factual. Um,
Yeah. I
and
mean, yeah.
and it's because, right, I mean, this whole thing, exactly what you said, it drives me crazy. It's like people on Substack write something there, or notes is the worst for this, where somebody will be like, oh, I've finished a manuscript, and I'm about to send it off to a publisher. Um, Congratulate me, and that'll get 2,000 likes. Everybody loves this. Oh yeah, can't
Yeah.
wait to read it. And then
Yeah.
somebody posts something, and it's like crickets out there. So,
It's
I
amazing.
just, it's amazing, and it feels like an intractable problem. I hope it's not an intractable problem because there does have to be some kind of a marriage between high quality writing and communicating over the internet, which is how everybody it's how everybody reads, it's how everybody communicates. So just kind of leaving everything in the hands of traditional publishing is not a long-term solution. So something from this space has to emerge, and I'd like to be part of it, but I think it's going to be kind of a long road to get there if we get there.
Yeah, it's something I think about too. I've sort of fallen into reading memoir more than fiction. Now, there's a lot of memoir out there that's bad, but it's almost as though when a memoir is bad, it reveals as much about the author in obvious ways, fascinating ways, that you can't really do when you read bad fiction. Because there's so many layers of imagination or, maybe poorly realized imagination, but what's being hidden? Like, I would never, reading Henchman, guess that it reflected your life in any way. You're telling me that it does, right? But, and I totally believe you, but because it was fiction, there's no real way that I ever thought that was you, right? And so there's a lot of imagination going on there. I can't really sort out Sam from reading that book. I don't think I can, right? But for example, if someone's writing a memoir about well, I recently read this book by a woman who talks to 4 different women who all had relationships with their professors. And she also had a relationship with her professor. So she goes from woman to woman and relates her own experiences into this. Okay? And there are parts of the book that are illuminating, but even the parts of the book that are not illuminating, the parts of the book where she's kind of ducking the issue or she's not, like, that's also fascinating. Like, it's like, whoa, it's like she doesn't even realize what she's telling me. And
Yeah.
that's a kind of fascinating aspect of nonfiction that I don't think fiction has. But I think the best fiction beats the best memoir. Like, I think if you put the best novel ever written, Tolstoy, I don't know, against some great memoir, right? Tolstoy's going to win because it's more immersive, more is being told. I just
Yeah.
think it's so much harder to write good fiction
Yeah.
because the bar is so much higher. For me, anyway.
Yeah. No, I agree with all of that. There's something else with fiction that's it's very complicated. It's like it's not you who's writing the fiction is where it gets really wild. That it's like it's some other creature that
Yes.
lives inside of you. And right, I agree with it completely. Like memoir is automatically interesting because people's lives are interesting.
Mhm.
And and you can happily be a lifelong reader consuming, only memoir or nonfiction. That's kind of where we are as a society. Fiction is this real like gourmet taste. And most of the fiction I read is awful. And a lot of the stuff
Yes.
on Substack is it's not very good and people are better, usually better when they're writing nonfiction because it's kind of closer to them. And I mean, and those are the dynamics. But I mean, I know the difference. Like I know the amount of energy that I put into a short story as opposed to an article. I just know that it's so much more complicated. It's so much more fulfilling. So a lot of it is just I'm interested in it from kind of the writer side, and and then it's like what's really going on because you're not because at a certain point with something as long as a novel and probably really even a short story, you no longer are able to draw on just the material from your own life. Like you kind of
No.
run out. And so
Yeah.
it's like, what exactly are you drawing on? And it's a few different things. Sometimes it's these deep memories. Sometimes you're tapping into this kind of collective consciousness, but it's this feeling of like, if you do it for a while, you start to feel like there are actually kind of a lot of yous that are living within
Yes.
yourself. Like there are a lot
Yeah.
of different voices, there are a lot of stories, and just that is such an exciting thing that it becomes very addictive. And at some point, for me, I think I've started caring much less about readers because just that process of kind of trying to excavate whatever's going on in there is just so much more interesting even than trying to figure out something that'll sell or publishable or whatever.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, what you say, I mean, what you've sort of harped on in this interview of like giving, you know, your subconscious its due. I mean, that's the only way this stuff is satisfying.
Yeah.
Unless you're tapping into that, unless you're surprising yourself, unless you set it up so that you surprise yourself, it's going to bore you to tears. I mean,
Yeah.
and you have to sort of go with, I think, what your milieu is, what each book's milieu is, because I think Norman Mailer said each novel is a gift, and it's just something that you can either, as you said, you have to choose the gifts you're given. If you have ideas coming, well, you go in that direction and you commit to it and see what it gives you. You know, what to just transition? What do you mentioned a novel you have in progress, but what about the other four that you haven't published, man?
I had to figure out what to do with them. I mean, I'll probably sort of send them out in some way. But look, I mean, some of the stuff is not really my choice. I mean, I've sent manuscripts of a couple out to agents or whatever, and really had no response. So I don't have a huge amount of choice here, man. I sort of have to figure out something within the self-publishing domain, and that's also just much more interesting to me. But yeah, I mean, I'm very into this idea of kind of museum without walls. I'm very interested in this idea of like Substack is kind of like, or it doesn't have to be Substack, but like a place online where you have your own kind of personal museum, where you're not really
Oh, yeah.
mediated by editors, by the market. And if people come to you, that's great. If they don't, that's whatever, it's fine. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to, in terms of the packaging, I do like the idea of just having Henchman living in kind of this online space. I mean, I'll make it available in kind of a Amazon form as well. But for me, the best publishing world would be like everybody has their kind of little kiosk or window. They put their stuff out within it, and then readers kind of find them, and then there's a community of readers connecting with each other. It's sort of starting to happen on Substack. I
Oh,
mean, there's
sure
this
it is.
thing with people. Alex Muka's book, like about a half dozen people have books out that I think they mostly self-published,
It's
then
happening.
they're doing kind of what we're doing, that they're like reading it and responding to it. This feature for reviews that I'm starting to do on the Republic of Letters is that. So I just like to think that this is the way. the feeling is that self-publishing just hasn't really worked for decades, if ever. And so we're kind of running into this stuff that just the conversation, the discourse is so controlled by a handful of publishers and then basically by what's reviewed in the New York Times or not. But I would love this idea of just getting outside of that framework.
Well, I would love it too. I mean, I feel as though you mentioned in some of your pieces about uplifting others' work. I mean, I think that very often that's where I think of the Wu-Tang Clan, right? Where they came out of Staten Island, which is where I was born and raised. They came from the Park Hill Projects, 12 people. I think one of them was from Brooklyn. And they just featured each other on each other's albums. They created a kind of universe which revolutionized like the way artists presented themselves to listeners. And it was brand new and it was generous. And I also think Joe Rogan's done it with comics. I think he's open. I think he is a good guy. I think he wants to use his fame to help other people get famous. There's a generosity that I think people don't give that guy enough credit. I think his generosity with comics is something that writers could learn from. It's my father always used to say this. He used to say to me, good writing is good for all good writers. Like you kind of want good writing to triumph if you're a good writer, because it will prepare the way for you. And I sort of feel as though Substack in many, many ways has to be a team. You have a really good illustrator who, I hope does the cover for, what's her name? I want to say her name. But
Yeah, Megan Gafford. Yeah,
yeah,
she's amazing.
she's amazing. She has a style all her own, as you have a style all your own with the writing. I think the two go together. I hope, the illustrations are done well. I like the one that you used for the full manuscript. I like the one. I think that would be wonderful if that were converted into a cover for your book. But I just feel as though there are people that could come together, whether it's a group of writers and a group of artists and a group of artisans who know how to produce books and a group of media people. I think I sort of feel as I don't know enough about David Roberts, but he's sort of like the patron of, of the public of letters, and I think also the Metropolitan Review. He
Yeah, that's
seems to
right.
be financially behind these institutions. Am I right about that?
Yeah, and I mean he's been a saint for this stuff. I mean, as a career Wall Street guy,
Yeah,
just
and he
great.
likes writing.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean he's retired. He described it as kind of a calling. He's been writing on Substack, and then right, and he's become kind of the uh, really the energy behind a whole bunch of at least two publications at this point. So. Yeah, I mean something is really amazing is happening, and for me, where it kind of starts is this feeling of understanding what is given with this change in technology. Just because I mean, for so long we've been in the particular kind of print publishing mode, and it tends to produce these different kinds of mindsets. I mean, this sort of scene that I was just the mindset of anybody I knew in New York who was kind of creative, it was always sort of the same. It just felt like everybody had this vision of themselves as kind of a star,
Yeah,
and people are competing with each other, and there's this understanding that only a couple of people are going to get selected, and once they get kind of chosen, then their lives become wonderful, and everybody else just kind of fades away into the margins,
yeah,
and it's just kind of like, what a terrible way of thinking and what a terrible way
yeah.
of living.
I
And
lived that way for a long time and thought that
yeah,
way for a long time. And, you grow up and you realize your limitations. You realize that, not everyone is, stardust is not thrown at everyone.
yeah,
it's just the
right.
way it goes. And that's just something you have to accept. And accepting that, I think, is key to owning yourself artistically. Because
Right,
what are your
right, right.
motivations for doing this? I mean, like, having a family is great too, because it's like, John, don't take
Yeah,
yourself so fucking seriously. Like, it doesn't
right.
matter if you didn't write well today because you have to change diapers. or it doesn't
Right.
matter if you didn't write well today because you got to go to the grocery store and you got to have those transitions. I'm not allowed to stay in a particular mindset all day long. I have to shift from writing mode to teaching mode to being
Yeah.
with my wife mode to playing basketball in my son mode. I just have to shift. You know what I mean? It's go to
Yeah.
the gym mode, and that's helpful to me because it helps me put things in perspective and not live as I did for the first 35 years of my life, thinking that stardom would come to me. I'm
Right. Right.
embarrassed to say it, but that's the way I thought.
No, same.
Yeah,
And that was also true for everybody I knew,
sure.
really. It's
Yeah,
like, I mean, this whole thing, and right, and so you're envious of your friends, and you're
sure.
competing with your friends, and then so and so has this amazing talent, and usually it turns out that they're also a complete jerk, and it's just the whole thing is so
Mm,
toxic, and uh, so it's been really important for me. I think this is just part of growing up, but a lot of people aren't growing up in this way, and it's really important for me to try to turn a corner on this,
yeah,
and to just be like so and so may not have they may not have all the gifts, they may not have amazing talent, but they can still write really well.
sure they can.
If they like
Yeah,
all they have to do is just say something honest, and that's going to be good uh, right there. And then, and then you can kind of keep building and building from there. So yeah, it's a funny thing. It's like you sort of have to say, I had a kind of a very vivid moment a few years ago where I was kind of like, I just sort of realized that I wasn't, that I kind of knew the border of myself in a way. I knew sort of who I was, and I wasn't really trying to be like better than myself. And it was just kind of like, okay,
mm,
like this is me. I'm gonna have to get used to this for the next X number of years I'm around, and it just got to kind of stay within that border, and then try to just be the best version of yourself that you can and have it that fully. I mean, you picked up on this thing in the article you wrote where I've been thinking about this a lot in kind of a baseball metaphor. That when I was playing baseball as a kid, the coaches would always say, really, what you want to do is you want to be hitting line drives. That the kind of the integrity of your swing is that you're always, first of all, looking to go with what's pitched to you, and then usually you're trying to hit kind of a line drive over the pitcher's mound into center field. That's sort of what you want to do, and then the power will come, the home runs will come. But if you're swinging for the fences every time, you're just going to pop up most of the time. And what I tend to see from a lot of writing is a lot of pop ups. Like a lot of people tend to feel like, okay, I want to write this wonderful sentence here, and they swing for the fences, and then it's just a sort of weird, over literary thing. So I might have said a moment ago, but I had this feeling a couple of years ago that I just kind of knew who I was. Like I
yes.
knew that I didn't want to get outside of the borders of myself. I I knew kind of I knew kind of the integrity of my own voice of what I wanted to say, and I wanted to stay within that and work within that, and then still be able to explore range coming out of that. But that's really where I am now, and what I think is a healthy place to be is to just kind of say like, okay, this is who I am. This is what I want to achieve. Basically, every time I write is a certain integrity, a certain honesty, and and then as you develop from that, then you can allow yourself to really play.
It's a great metaphor to end on too. I also love the idea of hitting the way the pitch comes to you. Sometimes choking up the bat. I also think it's a great. I think baseball is a great metaphor for writing. My father, who was a columnist for the New York Daily News, used to say to me always that column writing was like baseball because maybe 3 out of 10 are good. And if you get 3 out of 10, that's a 300 batting average and you're still an all-star. So the idea of like probably most of the time you're going to fail, but maybe less if you know who you are as a hitter, you know? Um, I don't know, Sam, it's been great talking to you, man.
Great talking to you, John.
Yeah,
Really has.
the interview lived up to all my expectations, and uh, I'm sure we could have a million discussions. There's 1,000 questions that I didn't even get to, but you know, an hour and a half is enough for and hey, who knows, maybe give us some, a reason to get back together. I loved your book. If readers got this far, I think they should absolutely read it. I think it's a novel like they've never read before. I think you'll fall in love with Banx. I think your heart will break with Banx. And I don't know. I'm a big fan, Sam, of you not only as a writer, but as you as sort of like a force for literature. I think that you having the vision and the idea to make things happen, you're one of the leaders of the brigade, the good guys, not the baddies, the good guys. It's a pleasure, Sam. All right.
It's really a pleasure. It's just thank you so much for the time, for really just getting this, and it's just nice to talk. I just feel very, very, very aligned with where you are, and just thinking about literature and what writing can be, and just feel it very strongly.